Hi Booktube, and welcome to a new video. This is a recent reads video for the last few days of June. I completed 4 books. Non-fiction, Ruth Ozeki, Time Code of a Face. Hernan Diaz, Trust. James Baldwin, Another Country, which is a buddy read, a group read. And Scattered All Over the Earth by Yoko Tawada, a Japanese author, and this has been translated by Margaret Mitsutani. So I'm going to start with the Ozeki. Obviously she won the Women's Prize, and I was in two minds of having read the blurb about the book that won it, the Book of Form and Emptiness. I wasn't sure. I mean, the concept sounded like right up my street, but it also sounded a bit whimsical, for want of a better word. So I was in two minds. I thought, well, what I can do is read something else by her. So I bought this non-fiction. So this is a very quick read. I read it in the bath. I do have hour-long baths, whereby she undertook a thought experiment or a brain training thing of sitting in front of her mirror and just observing her face for 3 hours undisturbed and uninterrupted. And the book alternates chapters between a sort of timestamp as she's getting through the 3 hours and also reminisce, so her in real time while she's doing this thing, and also the reminiscences that it brings up, because she's 59 years old when she does this, so she sort of sees the changes in her face as she's looking more and more like her parents' features. She hones in on specific features like scars, her smile, cheekbones, that sort of stuff, all of which are very well done. But it's the wider themes where she considers the face as mask, and she talks about when she went to Japan to study under a no master, N-O-H, not N-O, and how to make a no mask. And I found absolutely fascinating the intricacies and nuances of expression, because the point about Japanese theatre is you tend to think it's a blank mask, but it isn't at all. It's just really subtle nuances, and I found that really, really interesting. And she talks about all sorts of associations we make with the faith. That she doesn't talk about death masks, but she remembers the faces of both of her parents at their deaths. So I just thought this was, brilliantly done, and I gave it 5 stars. I'm still in two minds about her fiction, though. Okay, on to Hernan Diaz, Trust. So I saw both Bob the Bookerer and Fraser Springboard Thought talk about this book, and I give this 5 stars. I mean, this gets into my sort of top 10 reads of the first half of the year easily. I really enjoyed this. It's 4 books in one. Book 1 is a novel about 2 introverts who find each other and marry, and one is a huge financier in the US, and has a major impact on things like the great post 1920 regrowth after the crash, and then the 1929 Wall Street crash. So we're talking that level of player, and his wife, who does lots of philanthropy, but she's very ill. And you can tell it's a novel, apart from the fact it says it's a novel, but there's something very artificial about it. There's something very constructed and put together. But don't let that put you off. Book 2 is the real life memoir, ghost written, of the financier on who he presumes, and it is presumed, that fictional book was written. And he's furious about the fictional book because it made his wife out to have a mental illness, and also sort of implies that he was significantly to blame for the 1929 crash. And both the memoir and the novel see that main protagonist character mount a rigorous defence, saying, it's a market, how can one person dominate the market to have that kind of effect? And yet they also want to claim the credit for helping building up the prosperity after the first crash in 1920. So they want it kind of both ways. And that obviously the memoir echoes elements of the novel, even though the guy whose real life story it is very keen to distance himself from it, but there are still echoes of it, of one in the other. And it's unfinished. The ghostwriter has written notes to herself because the guy that she was ghostwriting for died before completion of the project. In the version that he's trying to give her, he's very much obviously sort of creating hagiography for himself, but he's also creating hagiography for his wife, that she didn't die of a mental condition, she died of cancer. He doesn't deny that she ended up in a sort of health sanatorium in Switzerland, which appears in both books, but he says it was cancer. So there's a lot of resonance between the two. And then you get to the third book, which is actually the point of view of the ghostwriter, who was a woman, a young woman with no sort of writing background. She was of Italian origin, her second generation immigrant, and her father was an anarchist. And there's a really fascinating interplay of obviously her anarchist background, which she doesn't adopt wholeheartedly, but she doesn't also want to sort of, annoy her dad, so she doesn't tell him who she's working for. Versus, great financiers and capitalists that is her boss, and she has to sign a non-disclosure agreement, or whatever they were called in the 1920s. But word gets out somehow because someone starts blackmailing her. They want to see the manuscript, the pages that she's doing. So she hits upon a scheme to save herself, whereby she creates another version, not the one she's formally ghostwriting for her employer, but another version to feed to this person who's blackmailing her, which is complete fiction. But also, it shows you the fiction of the memoir, because she's being lent on by her employer to, as I say, write this hagiography, particularly about his wife. He's sort of creating such a sort of caricature of a doting, loyal, supportive wife, that she has no life to breathe at all, and the memoirist is aware that this cannot be right, and she's keen to get to the bottom of it, even though she knows she'll never be able to put it in the book. So there are all these resonances and fictions upon fictions upon fictions. The relationship of fathers to daughters is very important across all three stories: the novel, the memoir, and from the actual real life ghostwriter, her actual relationship with her father. And then we come to the fourth, which is the shortest part, but just turns the whole book on all previous assumptions on its head, because it's a journal left by the real wife of the financier, which was undiscovered until the ghostwriter discovered it many years later, long after the project fell by the wayside. It's when she was quite old herself. And I don't want to give spoilers about that, but it's not only does it sort of turn the whole book on its head brilliantly and make you question all the information that you thought you'd worked out from the other three novels, but actually it's the journal was written while she was in the sanatorium dying of cancer, and it's beautifully rendered. It's journal entries, so that some of them are quite short, but it's beautifully rendered as she considers her failing body, the relationship of the body to the self, to the notion of I, when you know that that's about to be extinguished by death. It's about the last knockings of the things she can hear and smell in nature, and gradually these are stripped away from her as she gets more and more invalided. Her relationship with her sort of stern nurse, who she loves. Everyone else can't stand this nurse, but they have such an intimate, not sexually intimate, but an intimate relationship. It's just beautifully done on every level, touching, very, as I say, for the shortest part of the book, and it also manages to turn everything on its head. It's brilliant. I was so in awe of the control in this book by Hernan Diaz. 5 stars. James Baldwin, Another Country. So this was a group read with Roz over at Scally Dandley About the Books, Courtney Ferreter, Zena at Beating Around the Books, and myself. It's my second James Baldwin. I'd read Giovanni's Room. And this being James Baldwin, some of the politics are spot on, particularly the politics of race. The writing is incredible. He's a fantastic wordsmith. But, as with Giovanni's Room, I found the characters deeply unpleasant, couldn't warm to them, didn't really care for their fate. So very much a mixed bag. I mean, I'd give it 4 stars because the writing is supreme. So the first thing of note was that there's this guy called Rufus, who's an African-American jazz musician in the early 60s, has a younger sister, who I think is 14, when he commits suicide. Life just gets on top of him. And before he dies, he looks at his sister. He's brought her back this shawl, I think from Europe or Mexico, I can't remember now. And he puts the shawl on her, and he says, wow, it just sort of lit her up. She's a princess, she's a monarch, this is a paragon of, what it means to be beautiful as an African American. The writing and the writing of black female identity is extraordinary. Some of the best I've ever seen. Really, really good. Later, after he's died, Ida, his sister, once she's grown up, she wants to become a singer, a jazz singer. She hooks up with her late brother's best friend called Vivaldo, who's a white guy. And one of the first things Vivaldo sort of says was she was wearing this shabby shawl. So straight away you know that you've had this sort of high point of her being rhapsodized by her brother, and Vivaldo, who she's sexually intimate with, has sort of dismissed that, has not recognised the beauty, and that already sounds a warning bell for you. When Baldwin is talking about the pressures of society on people, in this case on this mixed race relationship, he's excellent. So there's one chapter that starts off whereby Vivaldo's gone back to his home, and he sees his neighbour through the window. This neighbour is a woman, I think a white woman, who brings home a different guy every night, and obviously sleeps with him. And Vivaldo I can't say voyeurism, because he can't see her having sex with this guy, but he imagines it. It's very squalid, very sordid, what's going on in Vivaldo's head as he's imagining this sort of sex scene between these two other characters. Then Ida turns up, and it's very comfortable, it's very loving, it's very tender, as they sort of embrace and then they're going out to a party, and the minute they hit the streets, their relationship is under scrutiny from everybody on the street. At least that's how it feels to Vivaldo, who's narrating this chapter, or this bit of the chapter. And suddenly Ida, who's been this sort of gorgeous thing in his arms, in an embrace in his flat, is now being perceived and dirted as a whore, a black whore with a white guy. She's using him, all this sort of stuff. And that is purely society perception, society representation. And that's done really well when Baldwin does it. There's another aspect when they're having a stand-up row in his house, and Vivaldo's telling her, look, keep it down, because not only do the neighbours, are they going to complain, but also the landlord and the cops outside are just itching for any excuse to evict us, because we're living in sin as a unmarried man and woman, but more importantly, we're a mixed couple, and any excuse they want to boot us out. And it's stuff like that that just makes you realise, what Baldwin and his generation were up against. All of that is brilliant. The problem is, though, we have a cast of characters here, and the only way I could describe them is polymorphously perverse. It's not that sexual identity and sexual preference is fluid. That's not the problem. The problem is all of them sleep with each other. They all betray their actual partners in doing so. They're all playing out their own resentments and self-loathing by sleeping with the other people in their circle. They're all betraying everyone in the circle. There's no genuine love in it. It's just horrendous. I mean, to me, they're all weak-willed, weak-minded. Now, again, yes, society plays a part in that, forming them that way, where they're very vulnerable. But equally, they have to take responsibility. They have agency. It's not entirely down to this external thing called society. And they're just awful people. There's no other way of putting it. Most of them are artists or want to be artists, and the successful one hates the unsuccessful one because he thinks he's maintained his purity of vision, whereas he's had to sell out. It's rather despairing as an artist myself that Baldwin seems to have this view of artists as, they're not the beautiful people at the top of New York society. They're the next lot down, and they're rather ugly. They're rather ugly. That they have transactional relationships. That they're not really aware of their own emotional needs and blockages and all this sort of stuff, which they sort of play out on the bodies of their friend group by having sex with them. So I really struggled with that part of the book because, as I say, Baldwin's argument about the deleterious effect of society he makes brilliantly, but he also undermines it by making these people so helpless, so weak, that it just doesn't wash. And even Ida, who's this sort of strong warrior queen, who takes no crap from anyone in the novel until the end, when she admits to Vivaldo, who's done the dirty on her, by the way. But she admits to him that she slept with this Svengali who can help her advance her career, saying she hated every moment of it. It was really effectively whoredom. So even she ends up being sort of ground down and quite meek, and we lose that great sort of sense of self-possession and regalness that she'd had up to that point. So a definite mixed bag. And the final book, Scattered All Over the Earth by Yoko Tawada. So I think the best way I can approach this is by giving you a fairly extensive outline of the plot. I don't think it contains spoilers particularly. And then you can see from there what I thought of this book. So Hiruko is from the land of sushi, which is of course what we know as Japan. It seems that Japan has disappeared under the waves because there's a lot of ecological disaster under climate change has struck the earth. And there's a lot of people who are forced to flee their home countries because they become uninhabitable, whether it disappears underwater or it's just constantly burning from forest fires and all the smoke has polluted it, whatever the causes. And these people flee to the countries that are safe, but they're not generally welcomed particularly. If their papers even survive fires and floods, their papers issued by a country that no longer exists. So they have rather unstable status. There's an interesting thing in the book which isn't really developed, whereby if you speak English in one of the European countries, they'll sort of deny you statehood and citizenship, and they'll boot you out to America, because America has a labour shortage, because Latin and Central America have seen an economic upturn, and that the Latinx speakers from America have all returned back down south of the border to their native countries for work, where it's more profitable for them. And America has a labour shortage. So that's kind of a really interesting idea, but it's not really developed. So Hiruko is currently in Denmark. She has developed a language which she calls Panska, which is a cross between Danish, Norwegian and Swedish, so that she can communicate with any Scandinavian through her own language. And she meets a guy called Knut, who's Danish, who's a linguist, who's absolutely fascinated by her, and they have a platonic relationship. He's purely motivated by linguistics, which I can buy. I don't have a problem with that particularly. Hiruko hears, or Knut tells her, of this guy called Tenzo, who lives in Trier in Germany. Actually, no, he doesn't. He tells her about a sushi competition in Trier in Germany, and that she's really keen to go down there because she thinks she'll meet someone who speaks Japanese, her lost language and her lost culture. So she's very keen on that. And again, I totally buy that. So this has been set up in a really interesting way. We've got ecology, we've got geopolitics, we've got linguistics, we've got a character with a genuine driving motive, which is she needs to talk to someone to, resurrect a shared language. All of that is right up my street. So very promising. But from there on, the book is just awful. Absolutely shockingly awful. So the first thing is, she goes to Trier, and each character has a section in the book where they basically tell their backstory. And this guy called Tenzo, who will be competing in the sushi competition, he isn't Japanese. He is from Greenland. He's an Inuit from Greenland who has adopted this guise and pretending to be Japanese. He's inhabiting another culture. And in a way, that's one of the themes of the book, is that will the world become and be better off by just becoming a giant melting pot of all peoples living together of different cultures, forced together by ecological disaster? Languages are very fluid and mutate one from the other. There's, Hiruko is consulted in Denmark by lots of ethnic Danes who have adopted Buddhism, and they're asking her questions about Buddhism. So all this sort of melting pot stuff, which seems to be presented very positively as a positive option for humanity. But then we get the negative side of that, whereby, is it cultural appropriation? Is what Tenko's doing cultural appropriation? Is the fact that Denmark and Germany have all of these sushi restaurants, is that, and they're ersatz, they're not genuine. and that Tenko is not even a Japanese sushi chef. He's a Greenlander who's learned some of the skills. Is it cultural appropriation? Is it erasing cultural difference and the uniqueness of different cultures, even at a level of language? Because Haruko has blended three languages into one, or sort of an Esperanto version of three different Scandinavian languages, all that sort of thing. And that seems to be the tension in the book, which is an odd tension. Anyway, so we get Tenko's story, whereby he just wanted to experience the world. He's in Greenland, it has a tiny population, he just wanted to experience more of the world. His dad had built robots, he didn't want anything to do with that. So he secures this patronage of a woman in Denmark who says, I'll pay for you to go to university. And he says, that's fantastic, thank you so much, but I need to learn Danish first. I've got to go to language school in Denmark. So that's how he gets over to Denmark. And then he sort of does the dirty on her, and he's not going to university. She thinks he's going to train as a doctor. He's not interested in that. I can't remember what his actual interest, what he did. Oh yeah, I think he wanted to build ships or something. Anyway, he ends up by a kind of strange set of circumstances. The job he did to pay his way through school was cooking sushi and all this sort of stuff, which he had some sort of natural affinity, because of course Greenland is very associated with fish, being a large island, and whales in particular. He sort of had a unique line in whale sushi. He visits Trier and sprains his ankle at the Roman ruins, and is discovered in pain, unable to move, by a German woman called Nora, who sort of takes him home, binds him up. And this is the first thing I want to read about the lousiness of the writing in this. So Nora has he's got his foot up in Nora's house. She gets this blanket to wrap around him so he's not cold, because he's only in a t-shirt. I spread a sheep's wool blanket out on the sofa. A friend gave it to me last year when I injured my anus. Sitting on it dulled the pain. Excuse me, you can't write a line like "when I injured my anus" and not talk about it, not tell us more about that. That's absolutely bizarre and absurd. Anyway, so Tenko and Nora get into a relationship. It gets serious. Tenko again sort of runs away from it, as he did from his university thing and his mentor. And the excuse he uses, because they're due to get married, I think, and the excuse he uses is that he has to go to, they're opening a festival of sushi or something. He says, I'll be back in time for it, but I've got to go to Oslo. Even though by this time he's discovered that the person that a partnership of two men originally set up the sushi restaurant in which he learned his trade, and that he's learned that one of the original partners, who was Japanese, has washed up in Arles in France, made famous by French painters because of the light there. So he's for some obscure reason wanting to meet this guy again, but anyway, he's got his heart set on going to Arles. But instead of going west to the south of France, he goes to Oslo to escape Nora. And there he's going to be a special guest sushi chef at a festival of sushi. Nora and Haruko and Knut and this guy called Akash, who's transitioning from a man to a woman, they all go off to find Tenko. But they don't go together. They all make their separate ways over there for some strange reason, which is odd, because the reasons that's given is, they all have commitments. And yet people like Tenko and this Japanese guy that we're going to meet towards the end, they've run away from commitments. They've run away from marriages, from pregnancies. It's shocking, their abdication of responsibility. But apparently they all want to commit to their jobs enough so that they all have to make different travel arrangements. But anyway, so Tenko goes to Oslo, where he's going to be this guest speaker. And the festival is put on by a Norwegian, described as a Norwegian nationalist, ultra-nationalist. And when people find out that the sushi includes whale meat and yellowfin tuna, there's huge pressure on the government to prevent this festival happening from the animal rights lobby. And they are protesting in front of the venue, and they've all got placards. And Haruko, when she turns up, she comments that these placards look crap, that as part of her practice of teaching Panska that she used visual aids that she drew, and she said, "Oh, my aids are much better than those." She says the lines on these placards are not clear; they're muddied. It's a shame that all Norwegians wanted to sort of make images in the manner of Munch, Edvard Munch, the Scream. So on the one hand, we've got all this, oh, isn't it wonderful how we all merge and blend and we become something new, and then you have this Norwegian thing of, well, the whole population of Norway is influenced by Munch and writes and draws and paints accordingly. Also, the ultra-nationalist guy is called Breivik. He's the guy, the mass murderer of 95 children, who was, the real Anders Breivik is an ultra-nationalist. It's a very strange authorial decision to echo that name, almost to dignify it, even though this is also an ultra-nationalist character. It's a very strange decision. Bad writing, again, I feel. Anyway, so the Oslo thing finishes. They all troop to Arles again under different heads of steam, and we get the chapter from this old Japanese guy. Again, he's run away. He was given money by his partner, and his partner was given money by a woman that he abandoned to set up this sushi restaurant, which becomes quite successful. This guy, the Japanese guy, is in the restaurant one night, and this woman sort of marches up to him, very striking woman, and she trips over, sprains her ankle. Like, oh, we've used this device before, haven't we? It's like soap operas who, when an actor announces they want to leave the soap opera, the script guys put them in a fatal car crash to get them out of the series, to write them out of the series. This is the same, and it turns out that she hasn't sprained her ankle. She announces that she's a dancer, so you'd figure if she thought she had broken her ankle or sprained it, she'd be furious. But oh no, we get this paragraph of them making lovey-dovey eyes at each other. Utterly bizarre. He gets her address details off her back. She lives in Arles, coincidentally. He's suddenly smitten by the image of this woman that he's had one night with, not even a sexual night, just a talking night. Abandons the restaurant, abandons his partner, who I think is 9 months pregnant, and goes to meet her in Arles. He tracks her down, rings the doorbell. She's shocked. Out comes someone who may or may not be her partner. It's never specified. Kicks the shit out of this Japanese guy, and he loses his voice, part of his injuries. But he settles in Arles, and he's just doing grunt work in a sushi restaurant. I don't even think he's the sushi chef. Yeah, he might be, but anyway, he's just doing grunt work, sweeping up and stuff. All this other lot pile in. They track him down. Hiruko goes absolutely, wow, another Japanese person, unlike Tenko, who was a false Japanese person, more of which are anon. And she just, at this guy who can't speak. And she's going, why isn't he speaking? And she tries, and she's just this wall of Japanese speech at him, completely insensitive, completely unaware of this guy's needs, which is shocking, really, because up till now, she'd been about the only sympathetic character, but sort of rather disgraced herself in that. Tenko, let's give you an example of Tenko. Okay, so this is where, is it Haruko? Yeah. No, it's not Haruko. So is it? I'm just trying to think who Tenko's talking to. Anyway, he's been rumbled, not by his partner Nora, but he's been rumbled that he's not really Japanese. Yeah, it must be Haruko. When he heard Nora's name, Nanook, which is his actual Greenland name, looked down, thinking it over a while. Lies no good, he said, finally looking up. Tell Nora truth, he added with a weak smile. Yes, it's best if you tell her yourself. If I were to tell her, it would be like I was talking behind your back. But cheer up, I don't think lies are necessarily all bad. Plays are lies, but they're art too. This character Tenzo you created is a work of art. In that sense, sorry, it's not Tenko, it's Tenzo. In that sense, Tenzo is the real thing. I mean, what an idiotic sentiment to write. I don't think lies are necessarily all bad. Okay. Plays are lies, as is any fiction, sure, yeah. But they're art too, yeah. This character Tenzo you created is a work of art. No, he isn't. So this book gets increasingly more and more idiotic, and dumb. I'm sorry, that's the only word I can apply to it. The geopolitics are also dumb. This tension is the writer advocating a great melting pot for humanity as our salvation, or is she saying no, we need to preserve individual cultures? That's not resolved. It's completely ambiguous which side of the debate she comes down on. Maybe you feel that's not important, she has to pick a side, but it just becomes confusing. I mean, after such a promising start and a setup, this book just went down and down and down and down. I gave it 2 stars, and quite honestly, if it hadn't been for the setup, which he then proceeded to torpedo, I would have given it 1 star. It's that bad. Yeah, shocking. The only other book I want to talk about is one I read quite a while ago. So this is the Unauthorised Biography of Ezra Maas, 2nd edition. It's a work of fiction by an author called Daniel James. Now, Dan's a good mate of mine. He actually edited my previous work for publication, which is Stories We Tell Our Children. So Dan and I are quite tight. I reviewed this when it came out, let's see, 2019 maybe? 18, 19? Yeah, one of them. I can't remember how long ago it was now. So 3 or 4 years ago. And I will post the link to my review, my original review, in the show notes. This is the story of a journalist called Daniel James on the track of an artist called Ezra Maas, a very reclusive artist who seems to have pulled up all his tracks behind him, both online and physical gallery stuff, so that it's not clear if he ever really existed or if it's some kind of prank or a cult, that it's disguising the activities of a cult. And Daniel James, the author, is on the trail of this, and it's very, very mind-bending as to who's actually on whose trail. Because if Ezra Maas really exists and is this paranoid, it's clear that as soon as he gets a whiff that someone's on his trail, he's going to do everything to disrupt that. So who is is Daniel James, the journalist stroke author, creating a story of Ezra Maas or a narrative for Ezra Maas? Or is Ezra Maas using Daniel James to further a narrative of absence and erasure and all this sort of thing? And it's just fantastic. It is obviously quite postmodern in its approach. The beauty of this edition is it has 60 additional pages, not of text so much, but of artistic presentation of text. So, for example, there's a coroner's report that Daniel James has tracked down of, I think, one of the wives or fellow students of Ezra Maas. And it's done, in the original it was written as a normal page like any other, but here it's done with the sort of proper sort of artistic representation of that coroner's report. We get all sorts of documents in true investigative journalist style, old newspaper clippings. And the point is, you don't know if any of these are true. To this day, I don't know if Ezra Maas really exists or not. That's the genius of it. You get sort of, redacted texts, telegrams, or reports, psych reports you get in here. Maps, hand-drawn maps. I think I just saw a coffee stained, coffee or blood stained. It's brilliant. It's beautiful. It's a beautiful edition. I'm so glad that to have a copy of this. And you get sucked into it as much as Daniel James is. So here's a questionnaire for psychiatric, trying to diagnose whether a child has a mental illness or not. So it's just stunning and beautiful, and I really recommend that if you haven't read it, that you pick this up, because I don't think you're going to be disappointed. Okay, so there you have it. I do have another video to record, which is my mid-year freakout tag, because unlike everybody else, I actually waited till the end of the mid-year. Mine will come with stats, reading stats, and I will also probably, because the tag is very specific questions, I will probably at the end of it just list to you the 10 books or so that I've enjoyed the most so far this year. I will not do the worst reads of the year. If I did, you can be safe in the knowledge that this would be in it. Anyway, thanks very much. Till next time.